Hi everyone, thanks very much for joining us today. Bear with me one moment. Okay, hi there. Thank you all very much for joining us for Crunch 3.5, the cultural change, brand safety and the positive selection of content. This is part of an event series that continues to be supported by our tab partners, Google and Xander, as well as our partner UCOM. This event actually follows on from our first event within our Interconnected Crunch series that took place last Wednesday, which was Crunch 3.4, Mapping the Cultural Change, where we discussed how the current climate change and the movement towards conscious capitalism is changing the way that advertising and publishing works. For anyone who may have missed it, we will be sharing a link to the recording in our follow-up email to this event. Additionally, please do join us for our final event of 2020, which will be Crunch 3.6, KPIs for the Ethical Ad Economy, which is taking place next Wednesday, the 9th at 9 AM. So today's discussion examines how we identify trusted environments through both trusted journalism and brand safety. And we have another stellar lineup of guests to bring their perspectives to the table. To begin the discussion, I'll hand over first to Nicola Kemp, Editorial Director at Creative Brief, to introduce our guests and open up the discussion. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Jenna. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce a brilliant panel we have today, and we do want to make this session as interactive as possible. So please do ask questions as you go along in the chat function, and we will answer them. I know we can't offer you a coffee, but hopefully we can offer you some good, positive and interesting food for thought this morning. So I've got a great panel with me this morning, as I said, so I'm just going to give them a quick introduction and then we'll jump right in. So Olaf Steenfatt heads up the Media Ownership Monitor Project and the Journalism Trust Initiative at the Press Freedom Watchdog, Reporters Without Borders. For many years, he's been engaged as a consultant in media development and digital policy. Olaf previously worked on German public broadcasters ARD and ZDF in various roles, and he's a member of the high-level expert group on fake news and online disinformation at the European Commission and the Committee of Experts on Quality in Journalism in the Digital Age, all at the Council of Europe. Dominic Carter joined News International in 1991, where he held various roles across the Sun and Times newspapers before leaving to join the Mirror Group as Group Advertising Director. He then returned to News International as Trading Director, and before he was appointed Commercial Director of News UK in September 2011. He stepped up to become Managing Director in 2015, and he was named Chief Commercial Officer in January 2016. In 2018, he was appointed Group Chief Commercial Officer for News UK and Wireless Group's operations in the UK and Ireland, where he oversees all national commercial operations across print, digital, video and audio. Deborah Harper has over 20 years media agency experience, and she spent the majority of her career as either a strategy or client lead on both global and European businesses. She's been responsible for brands such as Nokia, RB, P&G and Unilever, amongst others. She's been at Mindshare for just over a year, joining the global client leadership team in September. She is also chair for Mindshare Roots Worldwide UK and the UK representative of the Global Collective Council, which is actively involved in shaping the future of diversity and inclusion, not just for the agency, but for the industry as a whole. Stefan Ranjavolik is Director of Digital Risk and Brand Safety at Group M EMEA. He previously worked as an agency advocate in Brussels on many challenging issues for the ad industry, such as privacy and consumer protection. Stefan joined Group M EMEA in 2017, and he supports the company's digital operations by looking after all areas of digital risk, which includes reputational, financial and legal issues, as well as underpinning media quality processes and governance. Alex Payne is Vice President of Global Ad Operations for Vice Media Group, and he's usually based in their London office. He's worked for Vice for 8.5 years and currently leads the company's advertising operations department, which covers direct and programmatic media activation with a focus on vendor relationships, new ad product initiatives, and integrations, as well as commercial performance. And last but not least, Tina Lakhani is Head of Ad Tech at the IAB, the industry body for digital advertising, where her remit includes facilitating discussion and collaboration amongst the ad tech community to address mutual challenges. And her current focus is on user ID, brand safety, and transparency. She's also the UK liaison for the US-based IAB Tech Lab, where she works to educate and drive adoption of market standards from a technical perspective. Tina inputs on industry task force and the IAB gold standard. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. So we've got quite a big panel here on Zoom. So what we're going to do is we're going to everyone's going to talk for a little bit just to kick off the discussion. So Olaf, if it's okay, I'd like to kick off with you just to find out a bit more about what the Journalism Trust Initiative is, why it exists, how it defines trust. I think trust has been a word we've heard quite a lot in 2020, and what the factors that are used to define that and how it will be used. So if I could hand over to you first, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you in return. Thank you very much for having me, and good morning, everyone. To begin with, the word trust is something we also investigated quite a bit. And if I were to choose a wording for our initiative today, we would probably not call it Journalism Trust Initiative anymore, because actually trust is a very subjective thing. And you may very well trust Breitbart, right? And this is probably not what we mean. So I think we are more talking about trustworthiness. So maybe that as a footnote in advance. I think you might be surprised a little bit to hear that a press freedom watchdog and human rights NGO would talk about brand safety. And I must tell you that we are sometimes surprised ourselves. But I guess 2020 is the year full of surprises. So here we are. I guess most of you know RSF by means of our flagship publication, which happens to be the World Press Freedom Index, where we record and track press freedom violations and threats against journalism and journalists individually, which traditionally happen to be physical and legal. So journalists being hurt, killed, jailed, and this is what we still care for most. But over the last years, I think we have witnessed a whole new range of threats individually against journalists, but also our profession. And these threats happen to be induced by technology and economic threats as well, mounting to a perfect storm, you can say. And obviously all the traditional threats are not going away either. So this is how we come into this picture and why we start to think and engage. If you look at the larger picture of disinformation and our information space and the dysfunctionalities these days, we see two approaches of tackling this development. One happens to be more or less to chase the bad, to try and delete harmful content and demote malicious actors. And the other one is to support the good. Traditionally, we would be a little bit cautious on the first approach because we see actually that it can be misused and lead to overblocking and actually limit the freedom of expression if you delete too much. So this is why, by reflex, I would say, we tend to look more into the second approach to actively support the good online. And if you try and do this, the very next question would be, what is the good? How do you define this? And not surprisingly, an abundance of professional norms and ethical codices exists in our profession. So that's not the problem. But we, I think, identified two gaps and actual problems. One is compliance. So do we as a journalistic community really stick to our own norms? And what happens if we don't? And the second problem appears to be algorithmic amplification, which, as we all know, tends to push the exact opposite of ethical journalism, but sensationalism and clickbait and hate and lies and falsehoods. So if you wish, the point of departure of the Journalism Trust Initiative is to create the missing link between mostly existing professional norms in our trade and the algorithmic indexation recommendation of content. And in order to do this, we believe three things are needed. One is a unified list of criteria. And this is what we've achieved already. Last year, we published a so-called workshop agreement under the guidelines and criteria of the ISO, basically the International Standardization Organization. And this is a quite ancient instrument, but just maybe let me briefly explain why we went the ISO path for this exercise. The first, and I think most important reason, is an industry standard is the opposite of a law. It's a self-regulatory exercise of an industry getting its act together. The second reason is the ISO system is tested and scalable. We are not inventing or reinventing the wheel here, but tapping into an existing and delivering infrastructure and logic. And the third reason is that most media outlets, big and small, use ISO today already in domains like accounting, technology like paper quality, printing, signals and broadcasting, whatever. So it's usually in the DNA of a corporation already, and this is why we believe it's easier to implement from the publisher side. And the third thing, well, this is the first thing what's needed, the unified list of criteria. So this is, I guess, what we have. And the ISO process, I can tell you, is super challenging because you have to be inclusive, you have to go through a public consultation. So we went all the way and published this document. The second element which is needed, we believe, in order to make it work, and particularly this algorithmic interoperability, is the IT infrastructure. This means a self-assessment tool for media outlets to actually run this list of criteria and turn it into a data set, which is then machine readable in real time and can feed into search, into news feeds, into programmatic advertising. And this is what we are currently building, luckily supported with a grant from the European Commission. And this is, we are planning to roll this out next year by March or April. And then the third dimension, what we believe is needed, is a regulatory framework. We think that the list of criteria must be self-regulatory. We don't want legislators or advertisers or platforms or regulators to tell us what a good or bad journalism is. But we also do believe, and I think the whole grievances around the EU Code of Practice have illustrated this, we need some legal obligations for intermediaries to use these self-regulatory standards. The legal technical term is due prominence. And actually, and interestingly, there are examples for due prominence from legacy broadcast regulation, if you think of must-carry rules, for example, which create an obligation for distributors to use and promote or push and carry certain channels. Another example of due prominence is the quota of European works in the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is another case or example of, if you wish, affirmative action as well. And I think the quest right now, and this round, I think, takes place at a very timely moment, where today the Commission is supposed to publish the first draft of the Digital Services Act and the European Democracy Action Plan, where we actually need a regulatory framework for due prominence and a must-be-found logic, if you wish. What I think is important in closing to mention what JTI, the Journalism Trust Initiative, is not. It is not replacing existing professional norms, ethical norms, or structures like press council. It adds the level of compliance to those existing structures, which we believe has been missing so far. And what's also important to mention is that the Journalism Trust Initiative is not, the list of criteria is not looking at individual pieces of content. For two reasons. The most important reason for us is that this can go terribly wrong, because if you try to objectify content, it can easily be turned into censorship. And actually, we believe content is not objectifiable by means of an ISO standard. So what JTI actually is carrying and containing is criteria for the process, the manufacturing level of journalism, so transparency of ownership, correction policies. And we are not prescribing them. An ISO standard works in a way that you say, do you have an editorial policy, for example? Is it publicly available? And is it being enforced? And I think these three things, and this is what we are currently testing, is indeed objectifiable and certifiable as well. And when I say testing, and this is in closing what I would like to extend as an invitation, we are currently running a pilot to really thoroughly test this logic and toolkit. And if any publisher out there, a website, newsroom wants to join us in this road testing exercise, please, drop me a line, let me know. This would include going through the questionnaire, an optional possibility to run an external audit, and of course a little bit of feedback how it went. And I leave it there, and of course I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olaf. And everyone watching, please do add your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end. So thank you for that comprehensive overview. And you raised an important point around supporting the good. And with that in mind, Dominic, I'd love to bring you in here, because brands, agencies and audiences, they really need to be able to trust journalism and content. I mean, how can this be achieved? What kind of mechanisms should exist? And with increasing use of technology for this purpose, how can publishers move forward with journalistic integrity? What kinds of requirements are coming from brands and agencies, and how are you responding?
Great. Thank you for that. So I was given 10 minutes to talk about that. That's about 15 questions in there. And given it took about 10 minutes to read my ancient biog that makes me feel ancient, let me sort of try and break all those questions down. I think on the first one, how can it be achieved? I think if you looked at COVID, then I think it's been a powerful lens this year to look at the issue of trust. And I guess I'll come at it from a couple of different perspectives. If you remember the Lord Select Committee on Democracy and Digital Technologies report that was published in June, where it was titled, I think, we're facing a pandemic of misinformation. Lord Putnam, in that report, who's the chair of the committee, made a quote that he said, "We are living through a time in which trust is collapsing. People no longer have faith that they can rely on the information they receive or believe what they are told. That is absolutely corrosive for democracy. And part of the reason for the decline in trust is the unchecked power of digital platforms. These international behemoths exercise great power without any matching accountability, often denying responsibility for the harm some of the content they host can cause while continuing to profit from it." I think there's another perspective on that, or the other way that COVID shone a spotlight on the issue is how, in fact, people in the UK and many other countries around the world have turned to trusted news brands for their information, news and analysis throughout the whole of the pandemic. Just from our point of view, on The Sun and The Times, we've seen record digital reach this year. And the latest PAMCO numbers have cemented The Sun as the #1 news brand across print and digital, with over 36.5 million people every month. And The Times and Sunday Times grew its reach by 73% over the last 12 months. So when the government embarked on the biggest ever ad campaign through the initial phases of lockdown that's still running today, they turned to news brands for that, both national and regional and local, as the right partners. And because the brands that we all represent drive huge trust, huge engagement, and actually have proven to drive a significant change in public behaviour. And the trust that we have with our readers has been hard won. If you think about it, over hundreds of years, that has been through recognised and valued journalistic methodology and integrity. It's multiple sourcing, it's fact checking, it's discerning news from spin, it's debunking, it's story selection, it's keeping readers interested and informed. It's implicit in trusted premium quality journalism that facts are checked and people and organisations are held to account. And when on the rare occasions that something does go wrong, our journalism is held accountable through the editor's code, or with regulators such as IPSO, who have an agreed process of investigating complaints, which is both thorough and meaningful. And if you compare that to the dubious information or misinformation on social platforms and Google, which is unverified, unsourced, and unattributed, it's very difficult when you're dealing with misinformation or hate speech on social platforms, firstly tracking it down before it's spread too far, and or be the ability to remove things quickly once they have been notified. So what kind of mechanisms should exist? And I think, as mentioned, we have the Editor's Code and IPSO, so there are those legacy mechanisms, but like the Journalism Trust Initiative, there are other emerging organisations designed to tackle fake news. I'd argue in all these cases that they're good, they're well-intentioned initiatives, but we've also got to be certain that they're fairly adjudicated. And what I mean by that is that the fact checkers do not censor legitimate opinion that they may in fact disagree with. The big question, however, is will these values or flags of some kind get passed into the advertising bid stream? And will advertisers respond and pay for that? Advertisers put pressure on buyers to meet KPIs and seek out certain cookies and data sets. And therefore there is a conflict. There's a tension between the value and whether there's a premium should be paid for authentic, trusted and sourced news. Audience trust, I think, is also about how data is handled, and GDPR is one aspect of that. The Advertising Standards Authority has launched an ambitious 5-year strategy centered on strengthening the regulation of online advertising, which also will move to better protect vulnerable groups from harmful advertising messages and targeting. The government recently published its online harms white paper, and there's also the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. The recommendations of all of these will feed into the DCMS wider review of online advertising, and it seems likely that the industry does not, if it doesn't rapidly move in its collective governance, then the authorities will step in and do the job for them. So how can publishers move forward with journalistic integrity? Well, I think that all of us in the publishing industry, like News UK, invest enormous amounts of money in journalism. We always have done, and we build our brands on that journalism, whether it's at the mass market end with products like The Sun or the premium end with the Times and Sunday Times. And as we're increasingly a digital first in our business model, this issue is hugely important to us. The Reuters Institute every year publishes the Digital News Report, and this year landed in June. I'm pleased to say that they found that the Times is the most popular paid for online news source. 64% of people who subscribe to news brands do so because they value distinctive quality journalism. Facebook and WhatsApp were seen as the biggest conduit for misinformation in all countries covered by the report. 29% Facebook, 14% messaging apps. But worryingly, Facebook is also perceived to be the biggest social platform for news information. In Edelman's Trust Barometer, people grant their trust based on 2 distinct attributes: competence, which is delivering on promises, and ethical behavior, which is about doing the right thing and working to improve society. On that basis, it consistently found that traditional media was the most trusted. So readers seek out trusted information to help them be informed enough to make important decisions about the area in which they live, what kind of education their child needs, how government and the economy are performing, whether they should spend money or save, etc. Therefore, their trusted publications can also influence and drive behaviour change, such as leading a more sustainable lifestyle or choosing an electric car. So trust isn't just a brand masthead. It's a body of work over time that is consistent and doesn't let you down. It doesn't screech vested opinion at you, nor does it make mistakes. Our readers will also read articles that they may not necessarily have thought would be of interest to them because they trust our editing process, and that we wouldn't be publishing if it wasn't useful, important, or interesting. So trust is the most valuable asset that we have as a brand, and we work every day to protect that reputation. I think we've got to recognise, however, that advertising trust is in systemic decline. I mean, the AA study starts by saying public favourability to advertising has been in decline since the early 90s and is now lowest of all major sectors, including banking and energy. That's in part driven by unhealthy and exploitative advertising to vulnerable groups, bombardment, intrusiveness, suspicious techniques, and other issues that the AA report may relate very closely to digital media. The proliferation of digital media, the rise of more sophisticated or arguably nefarious targeting has degraded trust. So media owners packed their sites with tags, spewing theirs and their customers' data around the web. So bodies like the Conscious Advertising Network and the World Federation of Advertisers are all there with all the points that they make, whether ad fraud should be eradicated, the industry and the content it produces should be as diverse as we are, There's a zero tolerance to ad fraud with compensation for any breach, strict brand safety protection, minimum viewability thresholds, etc. So from our point of view, what we do is we are looking to continue to build trust. And from a brand safety point of view, we use semantic tech to understand content and block ads where necessary. We create guaranteed brand safe sections across all of our platforms. We block obvious things at source, e.g. terror attacks. But however, we've got to be confident to report the news. We've got to get away from the notion that news is not good for advertising. The opposite is in fact true. With the Ozone project, I guess we've taken account of the programmatic age, which is great in so many respects, but has also grown really quickly and without much regulation. And as a result, we think the best interests of advertisers, consumers, and content creators have been sidelined. The incentive structure in programmatic buying currently isn't helped by money from the advertising going in and being chipped away at by companies who understandably care about increasing their take rate. So with Ozone, we seek to address that by putting more money into working media and making it easy for advertisers to assess where money is and what it is for. And publications are increasingly being held accountable, both here and also on diversity and inclusion, and rightly so. So we take our responsibilities very seriously at News. We have a 50-50 gender balance that we're targeting and 20% ethnicity. We look to develop our early talent from all backgrounds. We're developing leadership pathways for diverse talent, and we have created businesses like The Fifth and Studio Pi that goes to promote unrecognized talent, creative talent from diverse backgrounds. I think the summary is that the people trust quality media, and I think I go back to the question. The question is, does that translate into advertising? Advertisers don't have a moral duty to fund journalism, but advertising in a trusted environment definitely works better. And I think we as publishers need to ensure that we spend more time focusing on that. But the good news is that advertising in quality media does drive results. So that was my alarm. I did it in 10 minutes.
That was very, very good. Thank you so much. Amazing timekeeping, and also just going over so many different aspects, and really interesting. And that tension with advertisers in terms of KPIs, and I mean this year, and like no one other, we've seen this incredible drive for efficiency, but is that drive for efficiency at the expense of quality? And you touched on the importance of trust in advertising, and with that in mind, I'd like to bring in Deborah, because I think it'd be really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing with Unilever and how that addresses the selection of the right environment for media spend, and also how it extends to diversity and inclusion, why this is important to Unilever, and why therefore you require sort of more critical thinking from media owners and publishers. And are you working with Group M on brand safety standards, and what does that discussion look like? So Deborah, if I could pass over to you, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Hi, thanks, Nicola. I mean, first of all, let me just say, I'm going to talk from a perspective of how we operate with most of our clients at the agency, and not necessarily just with Unilever. So I just wanted to clarify that to begin with. But I mean, in all fairness, obviously it's a huge topic right now, right? Diversity, inclusion, appropriate representation. I guess it's probably one of the top 5 things on most Marcom teams prioritizing right now. So for some of our clients, it's actually been on their agenda for more than a year. And for others, they're sort of just picking up pace. Either way, as a result, we have started the work on developing things like inclusion, private marketplace partnerships with LGBTQ+ and Black community publishers. And in the case of the latter, we've ensured that those partners have publishing platforms that are also Black owned and operated. So we're supporting Black owned business as well. The concept of the inclusion PMP was actually born out of the realization that ever tighter brand safety measures, you know, as Dominic mentioned, are kind of creating a stronger need for a significant proportion of the society to actually have access to that content, because they're being automatically excluded
due to the tight reins that are put around campaign targeting. And so in an attempt for publishers or our advertisers to avoid diversive, derogatory or otherwise inappropriate content, the exclusion lists, no longer blacklists or whitelists, there's a win. They've contained very overzealous use of words such as black, hip hop, rap music, gay, lesbian, and so on. And so the awareness had to be raised that those keywords were actually stopping brands from reaching consumers who might very well be interested in hearing from them and indeed buying their products. And so with that in mind, a number of our larger clients set about creating new brand safety mandates. So removing some of those negative keywords that would block ads appearing against perfectly viable inventory. And to solidify the effort, a number of our clients in the UK and the US predominantly started to buy from our inclusion PMPs. Obviously, if you spent the last 5 to 7 years building those inclusion or exclusion lists, then you've got a bit of a task ahead of you, particularly if you're also investing in technology to verify that your ads remain in brand safe space. It can take a minute to unpick all of that work. And so we've seen that some of our diversity specialist partners are actually being blocked. Their impressions are not being able to be served because the exclusionists still contain keywords that are blocking them out. So we're also working with our clients and our media partners and the verification providers to get past this as quickly as possible. And it's really important to our clients that we continue to do that work. Really the idea essentially is that we need to get it right. And to get it right, we need to also educate the brand teams. We need to educate media planners and buyers who typically tend to be, more on the junior end of the aspect of things. And so their experience and exposure to life is slightly different. And so that you have to do a lot more to kind of create that sort of validity of the audiences, particularly when it comes to understanding the size of the audience in each of those markets, because obviously we're looking at it from a global perspective. And in every single market, the diversity quota will be different because doesn't mean the same thing to everybody in every single part of the world. And so because of that, we really have to work hard to educate everybody to understand that you are talking about minority audiences, and because you're talking about minority audiences, their numbers aren't going to be as huge as those that we've become accustomed to seeing, particularly when you think about platforms like Facebook and Google that can give you hundreds of millions of eyeballs. When you start talking about an inclusion target that's got 2 or 3 million people, the tendency to dismiss it is actually pretty high, because you're thinking, well, what incremental reach is this really going to offer? So we have to do a lot of work, therefore, with our media partners to provide us with, the evidence that we need around the audience size. And so we look at each of those identity groups, be they LGBTQ+, 50+, etc. And we have to put a number to them and say, this is the size of the audience that you're going after. This is the value of their wallet. And therefore, these are people that you should actually be working towards targeting. And get those media planner buyers and the brand teams, etc., to put them on the consideration list. Obviously, it's a planner's job to advise and make recommendations on appropriate channel selection. So the idea is not necessarily to say what they're doing is wrong. It's just about saying we now have to look at a wider pool, and that pool is an incremental audience and not necessarily a whole new swath of, a massive number of people. So essentially, that's one of the reasons why we're introducing new planning tools and planning principles to create more of a human layer of culturally relevant channel selection. So a prime example is I've been working on a campaign recently that is targeting products aimed at Black women. And so I've lent my lived experience as a consumer of that product to help sense check things like language sensitivity, relevant cultural moments to communicate to women like me, and appropriate publications, influencers, social content to appear against. So you can reach women of color in a really authentic and true way. Obviously, got to be careful of the sample of one. So my input is actually on the back of consumer insight, focus groups and claim data. The challenge with all of those is the robustness of the numbers, since there hasn't really been a focus on Black female shoppers to that extent, particularly in the UK. So much of the data that is available is quite inconclusive. And this is another reason that we need media owners to support us with any information that they can share around audience insight, shopper behavior, anything they've gleaned from their reader research, to be able to help us to create a bigger data pool to target women or anyone, actually, people from diverse backgrounds in a more authentic and realistic way. And it just helps to supplement the information that we currently have available. So overall, we're basically working hard to drive inclusive targeting without compromising brand safety measures. And, you know, it goes back to that point of what news content should we be running against? What should we absolutely avoiding? And beyond news, what should we be doing around YouTube content producers or Snapchat content producers, or wherever those content producers sit? Not everything that they produce is inappropriate and should not be targeted. And it's especially getting your head around the concept that if it contains anything, you know, with terms that we've become accustomed to associating to negative, that actually we need to move beyond that and get away from that. So we are driven by client demand, and our focus as an agency is to bring about more positive changes in media planning for underrepresented groups. And of course, we're working with Group M on evolving brand safety standards in one of the, it's definitely one of the key factors, as well as creating additional PMPs for other identity groups to be able to push for greater levels of inclusion. And I'm sure when you speak to Stevan, he'll tell you more about, you know, what we're doing from a Group M perspective around building out those brand safety measures and then infusing them into the clients. So the clients that I'm working with now, it's a very big topic. It's high on their agenda. They are keen for us to get it right. They want to get it right. And we definitely want to look at our teams overall who are planning and buying to make sure they are also representative of the audiences that they plan and buy against.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for such a comprehensive overview. So interesting to hear you talk about authenticity, because we've heard so much about the importance of authenticity and representation in the creative work itself. Really important to have that discussion when it comes to where that work is appearing as well. And so with that in mind, Stefan, I'd love to bring you in here to hear more. Deborah mentioned Group M's approach to brand safety. So I'd love to hear from you about Group M's approach and how you identify trusted content, what you believe the unifying factors are for advertisers, and some of the contrasts that you're seeing, and obviously like the challenges that you're facing as well, and the implications of those challenges to publishers.
Thank you, and thank you, Deborah, for being such a wonderful ambassador of our common approach. I think everything Deborah just said is really applicable across many clients and many group agencies. What I'd like to talk more about is exactly that. What is unifying a factor for our clients? And that is one word, I would say, quality. So for us, quality is defined by suitable and safe environment, good viewability, non-existent or very low fraud, engaging environments, and that trustworthiness. How we go about it is that when we build our domain or app inclusion list, I'm not speaking here about keyword inclusion or exclusion list, we take as the first step we take those trust publishers we already work with. We have also partnered with organizations such as Internews to include not only international and big national media brands, but also local brands who are news brands who are really important to reach the audience, but also, you know, for the functioning of the democracy and free speech. And then obviously we also look into industry standard, industry certifications such as tag brand safety, ad fraud, IAB, UK gold standard, and we try to, you know, to put all that together and present an inclusion list of domains where our clients should be investing. But as I said, one of the first layers of quality is safety and suitability. And how we approach this is that we allow clients to determine their risk tolerance level, be it medium, low, or high. Based on that, we recommend different routes. The challenge that we have here is that there is a fragmentation in definitions, fragmentation in tools. So everybody has their own definition of what is safe and what is not safe. Then it seems that there is a tendency for everybody to implement their own tool, which is then differently aligned, which is then differently defining inventory and etc. And this is where I personally believe the issue is, particularly around premium publishers and news, because some clients do not believe that some news are safe, whereas publishers may think that all news is safe. What we should all agree is that trusted news publishers' inventory is safe, but not always suitable for brands. And this is probably the greatest contrast when we speak about the brand safety debates. It is really not an on or off game. Every advertiser has their own sensitivities we should account for. And how to go about this fragmentation? We believe that there are industry standards that are already there or are being developed that will help us all get there. I think IAB Tier 1 and Tier 2 content categorization is already there, and most publishers use it. There is a new framework which is developed by Global Alliance for Responsible Media, GARM, which is Brand Safety and Suitability Framework, which basically works off 11 different harmful content categories, such as hate speech or profanity, and basically tells us what is the brand safety floor, actually what should never be monetized. And then it goes to define what is high risk, what is medium risk, low risk, etc. And if we are to all somehow align on these definitions and actually start using them actively, I genuinely believe that would open much more monetization opportunities for publishers, and also it would open inventory for those risk-averse advertisers who would then be more comfortable that everybody is working off the same definition. So to finish, we truly believe that trusted newspapers content is quality content, and I think you will have found Group M in the past advocating against the use of keyword block list, extensive ones, advocating for more investment in media brands. But as I said, we can do more to ensure that the content is classified in order to ensure that we all have the same understanding what is safe and suitable. And the messages that I've heard today and some of the tools that Olaf has also mentioned, I think we would be, from the media agency, I believe all advertisers, more than delighted to see more tools that allow us, to implement that into our media buying, that allow us to reach those publishers, but while maintaining scale.
Thank you so much. And with those tools in mind, Olaf has shared the link to the JTI standard documents. And just to remind everybody, if you do have questions, please do put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll definitely get to them. Thank you, Stefan, for sharing how Group M is advocating for more investment in media brands and the work that you're doing to really help raise the bar. I'd really love to bring Alex in now to walk us through some of the things that you've learned about current approaches and the progress that is being made when it comes to brand safety. How are you linking that to the requirements of advertisers, and how are you using groups like the Conscious Ad Network to ensure that diversity and sustainability are supported and that hate speech is not funded? I think the point Deborah made earlier about inclusion targets was a really powerful one with that in mind as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Yes. So, I mean, at Vice, brand safety isn't a topic that is unfamiliar to us. Since the beginning, really, we've had content that we've recognised is not, you know, safe for all advertisers. There is an element of risk there. We take risk with our content, and we love advertisers to, you know, come on that journey with us. But we recognise that, you know, perhaps more the heritage style of content could be avoided. So building on that, and obviously being very vocal around particularly the way that we represent our audience through diversity, their identity, culture. These are important aspects of our own identity and our content from the start. We've been very vocal, particularly recently, the last couple of years, on, you know, particularly block lists, tactics that, whether consciously or unconsciously, is leading to this content being not effectively monetized and making it difficult for the likes of Vice to continue to produce it in the way that we intend to, the way that we've started to and would love to continue. So what I'm recognizing, and particularly on this call, which I really like to see, are a couple of things that really resonate with us. The standards one being a principal message here. We'd love conversations with our clients to be more about positive targeting rather than exclusion, negative targeting. It naturally becomes a more positive conversation there, and people are not always worrying about where their advertising may appear. It's about where do they want it to appear. And that leads on to trust. So direct publisher relationships, you know, understanding the platform where you intend to advertise. Programmatic is exceptional at reaching audiences on scale. It was touched upon previously, but there are downfalls in that. There are ways that you can rely too heavily on technology and algorithms and in the belief that you're arriving at an impression that is effective for your marketing, when in fact you're fighting over the equivalent of a mobile leaderboard. You know, it's a very small window of opportunity and not particularly relevant for today's audience. So I would encourage, even through, you know, programmatic platforms, selection of publishers that you know you can trust, and you trust them to continue their message that, you know, you identify with yourself as an advertiser. Going back to standards, I mean, the vendor situation is an important one. There are vendors which, you know, lead the market around contextual targeting and understanding. We need them to align and, you know, come together on a set of standards that can be deployed across publisher, because, you know, differences are not going to help the situation here. It's still going to allow for conversation and concern. In terms of publishers being content creators too, I mean, let's not forget that they're the ones behind the content. And despite the wonderful targeting options that are available on the larger platforms, it's that direct relationship that's always going to shine through in terms of, you know, that understanding of what it is that, you know, we filmed or we've written. One thing that I wanted to mention is that we should be careful not to be overly selective now and not pivot too much in the opposite direction. It's an exclusion tactic in itself, and I think the importance is to be as broad and as diverse as possible with the audience and the targeting that we apply. And there's an element of obviously advertisers knowing who their customer is and continuing to seek out that customer. but there's also an element of discovery that's important about who else might become a customer. So with that in mind, it's always good to keep things nice and open.
Thank you so much, Alex. That element of discovery is always one of the best bits of good content, and such a great experience for readers and advertisers. Everyone's given us so many insights to this issue, and there is a lot of different angles that publishers, media owners and brands all need to consider. And with that in mind, I'd really love to bring in Tina and really find out how the IAB Brand Safety Working Group is progressing. What opportunities for progress do you see, and how can the industry work together to move forward on some of the issues that we've heard about today?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Nicola. And it's been such an interesting discussion so far. And kind of throughout all of this, I've been taking notes, and it kind of changes what I'd come to say originally, but it's just such an interesting discussion. And so, as you introduced at the start, so I'm from the IAB, and we, as part of it, one of my areas of my role that I'm focusing on is brand safety. And as part of that, I head up a cross-industry brand safety working group. So it brings together our content verification members from us as IAB UK, but we also work with a number of relevant industry and trade organisations as part of this group as well. So the AOP are involved, IPA, ISBA and Newsworks, and we all kind of came together, and originally we met up kind of to set up a town hall where we wanted to address the issue of there being an overzealous use of keyword blocking, and to kind of come together as an industry and see what it was that we could do to kind of help minimize the loss of revenue to publishers because of keyword blocking, or misuse or overzealous use of keyword blocking. So we met with kind of all the industry, and different parts of the industry represented their opinion of the conversation, which, as you said, and as you hear as well as part of this conversation, there are so many different opinions to this conversation. So we heard from ISBA, who are representing the advertisers, and their position was, you know, the need to adopt kind of brand safety strategies and to use keyword block lists is because trust within the industry has been broken. There have been many examples, and actually, you know, pulled up some examples where, you know, there were ads being shown in environments where brands wouldn't want to have been seen. We then heard from the IPA, so it was actually Group M speaking on behalf of agencies, and where they were saying, you know, there is no kind of industry standard way to how brand safety should be managed within digital advertising, and so each agency has had to take their own approach and come up with their kind of own approach for brand safety. So Group M have obviously talked about some of their own, but I know that there are some overlaps, but there is no kind of standardized way across all agencies of how brand safety is being managed. We then heard from the content verification tools, who essentially were saying that you know, they recognise that it's an issue, but it's not a content verification technologies provider responsibility to determine what's brand safe or what's brand suitable for a brand. What they can do is provide a technology for a brand to be able to implement, or to be able to target or avoid content that they deem suitable or not. But it's not their responsibility to decide what that content should be. And then lastly, we heard from the AOP, who are just kind of emphasising that, you know, this is it's a really big issue for publishers, and there's a huge loss of revenue to publishers because of this issue, and essentially we have to come together as an industry to work together to resolve it. And so we launched our cross-industry working group, and earlier this year in January we launched what we named our content verification guide, which is essentially just kind of a really practical guide on how an advertiser can set up a brand safety strategy from start. And it would essentially help them set up a brand safety strategy that would be effective in minimizing their risks and protect their brand online, but also one that would help minimize the risk of loss of revenue to publishers. And the launch of our guide couldn't have been kind of more timely. So we launched it in January, but then in March and April, when coronavirus struck, this was kind of an issue that really got highlighted because coronavirus and kind of related keywords were appearing on advertisers' exclusion lists, keyword exclusion lists. And that was causing a huge loss of revenue to publishers as well, as I'm sure many people on this call would be very familiar with. And Dominic talked about how news publishers, their scale and reach really grew this year, but actually news publishers were also some of those hardest hit by coronavirus and keyword terms being put onto these exclusion lists. And obviously at a time then and kind of still now, when news publishers are so vital in bringing us critical information to stay safe, this issue kind of really escalated, and there was a lot of government interest in this topic too. And in fact, you know, there were powers within government that were very much ready to kind of use their power to put rules in place to prevent this being an issue within our industry if we as an industry were not able to come together and work to resolve this issue ourselves. And quickly at that. So, so I should say, actually, it was even before it was ever kind of escalated to government. Our cross-industry working group had already met to start talking about how we address this issue. We worked together as a group to promote the new Newsworks Back Don't Block campaign. And we worked really quickly to produce guidance for advertisers, which was kind of like practical guidance on what an advertiser needed to do to support the message that we were providing, which was, you know, support news publishing. And it was kind of the practical steps of what do you need to change in your strategy to be able to do so. So that kind of earlier this year was quite a resource intensive piece of work that we did. We also worked very closely with our content verification members to collect data on, it was like a weekly basis where we were collecting data on how much inventory was being blocked by keywords. And we kind of worked a lot with the industry to push the messaging, and with support of DSPs and support of government to kind of push the messaging and drive change and to bring numbers back down, so blocking numbers back down to what they were kind of at pre-pandemic levels. So the group, in terms of, so since then the group has kind of been quite quiet. We did have a conversation about how we kind of work together to help advertise or help the industry better manage diversity and inclusion and minority audiences within their brand safety strategies. However, the group has just been a little bit quieter at the tail end of this year, just because it was really resource intensive at the start, and obviously a lot of companies have been hard hit by the pandemic. But in terms of kind of the future scope and plans for this group, I guess one thing that I wanted to kind of differentiate or kind of carve out as kind of where we sit with this group is that within this conversation, so today's event within the industry and this conversation generally, there's a lot of talk about various like tools and initiatives that are coming up in this area, and some of which are trying to kind of identify standards or even define lists of the type of content that should and should not be supported. But from our perspective, we take the position that it's not our place as IAB UK, or it's not our place to decide for the industry what kind of content should or should not be monetized. And actually, you know, what we can support though is that advertisers have the right to decide what type of content they want to support and monetize. So the objective and scope for our brand safety group is to work together to enable advertisers to protect and support their brand online, and while minimizing the unintended loss of revenue to publishers from doing so. And that will kind of go on to next year, where we'll continue to meet and work towards that objective.
Thank you so much. And as you were talking about tools and initiatives and standards and how a lot of brands at the moment are looking to set those standards, we've got a question for the panel. So Stefan suggested the GARM standards would be a true unifier. What do the panel think? Who would like to take that? It's quite anyone up for that particular question? Okay.
I can just,
sorry,
Dominic. No, I didn't. No, I just wanted to say, I think GARM is a very new development, the actual brand safety and suitability framework. So I think we need, as the industry, to come together, particularly with publishers, and understand what the implications are for them, and take it from there. So I understand why people are unable to fully comment, because it is a new framework, and we all need a bit more time to get to it.
That's what I was going to say. I think they need to be taken further and discussed as a group, and that's ultimately, I think there's no definitive answer yet to that, but it's a good start point for all of us. And I think if you look at the, from the Global Media Charter, point of view, that it comes to the World Federation of Advertisers, they also quote, they are all the things that we're all trying to answer, both in individual publishers, and I guess to an extent with what we try to do with the collection with Ozone as a project with the Guardian and Reach and the Telegraph. We look at that through the lens of a Global Media Charter. These are the things that we're trying to address, and I think we've got a long way to pretty much ticking the box on most of those.
Thank you, and thank you very much.
Just one quick observation from our standard setting experience as well. And this is, I think, true for ISO standards in general. The best motivation and incentive for standard setting is to preempt legislation, like an industry getting its act together before legislators or regulators kick in. And I think in our space, this is exactly the moment in time where we, I think, sense more and more attention and fire under the roof in political quarters. And this is, I think, what drives all these initiatives. And I think that's what we are also seeing, probably all eyes on Brussels today with the DSA coming up and tackling this probably as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. So a second question, and it's something that was mentioned by quite a few of you. When it comes to talking to brands about this issue, how do you shift this issue to be one that's more focused on positive targeting? So obviously the Back Don't Block campaign was very much part of shifting that narrative. But does anyone have any insights about how to shift that conversation with advertisers to being a more positive one?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on this one. So, like I mentioned, we've gone to press with our our feelings around the matter of positive marketing tactics and not ones that are going to exclude groups, identities that need to be spoken for. And often, the advertisers that we work with and have to identify, these tactics in what they're looking to deploy on our sites, have been, they've been very kind of open to looking at it and working to change it for the positive, really. And often it's just a case of pointing them in the direction of what they're using, allowing them to actually see what's declared in their block list. So often these lists might not have been looked at for years, and they may have just been reused each and every time and become more and more lengthy with new and supposedly relevant terms in relation to content that they're afraid of. And when in fact all it needed was a dusting off. They needed to review it, and that's what we hope they go forward with in the future, and they kind of regularly review. If they have to use keyword block lists, we'd sooner see them use categories, because often you could take 1,000-word list and determine 2 or 3 categories from that list. If they have to use keywords, then at least review them regularly, and they appreciate that.
I'll just add to that as well that I think that part of what we've been doing as well, and we included it with our content verification guide, is to also talk about the positive. So it's not just about supporting this kind of content for the sake of publishers and their kind of sustainability. It's also works in the interest of the advertiser with the increased reach and scale that they would get and also in some cases the reduced costs. And it's not something that we included within the content verification guide. It's just something that I thought of while we're having this conversation, is that, and I remember it being brought up in our conversation when talking about how to target minority audiences, is that actually there are advantages in doing in kind of reaching audiences that not all advertisers are going for, even from a kind of a cost benefit. So there's less competition on them. So actually there's a lot of advantages and cost saving for advertisers and return on performance by expanding their reach and including all publisher types.
I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what I think brings about quite a bit of, I think, a shift in political thinking these days is COVID, because what we see, I think, all over is a wave of COVID aid packages for media being, passed by governments, and usually these packages come with no methodology attached. How do you allocate these funds? So this is a big demand for a mechanism and a way of thinking of positively supporting media coming from governments. We've seen this in Canada with a law last year, already pre-COVID, of 600 million per year to support local and small community media with zero methodology attached. So they are now struggling to find a way to do this properly. And another example is Austria with the COVID aid packages, which is allocated only due to circulation. And this then means that Kronenzeitung will get everything almost, which is probably not what is intended. So this is an example from another space, governments, where this kind of due prominence thinking and supporting the good is actually also very high up on the agenda right now.
I was just going to add, with regards to some of the points that Tina made around going after audiences that are in sort of smaller demand and actually being able to conquer them, if you like, probably a bad choice of words, but it's to add the value of that audience, because even though they may be quite small in numbers, they tend to be quite high in wallet spend. So to be able to quantify them and say, actually, did you know that, for example, the Black female beauty shopper spends 9 times the amount that her white counterpart spends, and actually that's a valuable audience to also go after. Even though the number of people is smaller, the amount that they spend is actually greater. So all of those types of conversations help to turn it into a much more positive discussion, because now as a brand you can see the budget value or the revenue value of that audience. To make it a little bit more purpose-driven, purpose is a huge area which most brands are anchoring themselves to, is to have a purpose, particularly around sustainability. And there is that intersection between sustainability and ethical media, and that then allows you to have a much broader conversation around inclusivity and making sure you're reaching people from lots of different areas and supporting underrepresented communities or underrepresented audiences. And that is a much more positive conversation to have, as opposed to not, the negative of blocking is actually more around how do we open it up and become much more accessible and inclusive and provide a platform for visibility, essentially.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That's such a good jumping off point as well for brands and agencies and media owners to have a slightly different conversation around this topic. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to pass back to Jenna at the AOP after this final question. And I was hoping you could all give us just a little bit of insight, because I know unprecedented has been the most overused word of 2020, but let's be honest, it has been an unprecedented year. And lots of brands and agencies have talked a lot about this reset moment that this crisis affords us all. And in many ways, this has been a period where people across the world have depended on quality journalism like never before, whether that's local, national, or niche publications. So if you could all leave the audience with just one takeaway as to one thing that they can move forward on, because this is such a big debate and you've given us so many insights already, whether inclusion targets or campaigns like Back Don't Block, but one thing that the audience can take back to their virtual desks and put into action, that would be great. And Dominic, I'm going to put you on the spot and start with you, if that's okay.
Start with me. I might still be here in half an hour. Look, I think all the conversations really interesting. You know, from the block lists, you know, and keyword blocking. You know, and I think just to feed back on that. We have numerous conversations with advertisers, and I think a lot of advertisers, best will in the world, as much as they try and do all the right thing, are not necessarily fully aware of all the tools that have been used, you know, to safeguard their advertising. And I think, and unfortunately, in many conversations with clients, you know, when you unearth this with them, they're surprised. They're surprised at how blunt a lot of the work is. I think the key thing for me is that ultimately journalism is incredibly important for you know, for democracy, for society as a whole. You know, we take our duties, you know, incredibly responsibly as media businesses, you know, that are under the news brands that we have and many others have. And I think it's important to recognise that. That is expensive. That does come at a cost, and it does need to be funded, but it is trusted. You know, and I would urge people to think about how do you have more direct conversations than relying on the long tail of the open market.
Thank you. And Olaf, could I get your insight, please?
Yes, I think this conversation, I think, underpins our impression that there is obviously a substantial overlap of brand safety and the sustainability of journalism, which I think we will have to define and turn into a win-win for, I think, everyone involved. My main takeaway is that obviously the advertising-based business model of journalism or the media is not as dead as it's always declared to be. I think there are estimates of north of 50 billion every year lost to ad fraud and mistargeting. And just imagine we together could turn just a fraction of this and retarget and redirect this towards trustworthy journalism.
Thank you. That's a great point. And Deborah, could I bring you in here for your main takeaway, please?
Yeah, I would say open your mind to the possibility that there is content out there that's created by a different set of people that you wouldn't normally target. And those people have a huge following, and actually those are audiences that you could go after. So look at people that are creating content who are from a different ethnic minority background, who are from the LGBTQ community, who are from differently abled, etc. Those content creators have massive followers. And those are people with money to spend. So open your mind to the concept that there are other people that you could, other content producers that you could be targeting, and remove the blocks from their content so that you can reach their audiences.
Thank you. That's a great tip. And Stefan, could I bring you in here, please?
Well, I can only concur with everything that has just been said, but I think one of the main thing we can all do is probably have, I know this may sound strange, but I do believe that we can have more empathy towards each other, understand advertisers, agencies, publishers' needs, and work more and better together to find solutions that are mutually beneficial. So I do think that one thing is probably industry. Stronger and tighter industry cooperation with simply more empathy.
Thank you. That's a great point. And Alex, could I ask you for your takeaway, please?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as disastrous as this year has been, I suppose a silver lining in respect of this conversation is that it's brought a somewhat marginal issue from before into the very front and center of our thinking and of conversations like this. So that in itself, we feel good about, at least, because people are with us on the mission, really. And one thing that I'd like people to go away with, really, is that I'd like people to think about, I'd like marketeers to think about the content that they wish to read themselves, and therefore requires continual funding.
Thank you. That's a very powerful point. And Tina, just lastly but not least, please could we have your takeaway? Thank you.
Yeah. And I totally agree with Alex. I think that the pandemic has actually brought so many issues that we kind of had bubbling away into like a pressure cooker during coronavirus, like lockdown. It's kind of emphasized the importance of so many key issues. So it definitely has been one good thing to come out of all of this for our industry. I actually, my one takeaway would probably be the other side of Stefan's, actually. So Stefan's is around understanding the people that you're working on, their perspective. I actually would say one of the main things that we can do better as an industry is work better to understand each other's technology. So if you are, using a content verification technology, take the time to understand how that technology works, how it's been built, and therefore how to use it. Don't kind of copy paste a strategy from a previous campaign or a previous experience just onto this one. Take time to work with your partners and understand what they're doing. And it's not just your content verification partners, but also, understand the publishers and everyone that you're working with, to understand how they work and what they have in place. So we all know how to work better together.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the panel for so many different tips. But the closing point of Tina about working better together, working harder to understand technology, working harder to have a more positive conversation about content, supporting the good, opening your mind. A lot of the conversation today has been around empathy, whether that's empathy as an industry, having empathy for all the different parts of this big issue, and also empathy for audiences. So thank you so much for such a wide-ranging discussion, and thank you so much to the AOP for bringing it all together. I'm just going to pass back to Jenna. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Yes, thank you so much. Just to echo Nicola's point, we just want to say a huge thank you to you all for joining us, and your insights, and just for your time today as well. It's just been so valuable, and a really great discussion with some really clear actions from your takeaway points as well. But just for the audience as well, and yourselves, please do join us for our final event of 2020 Crunch 3.6 next week. It'll be the same time on Wednesday the 9th, and we'll look forward to seeing you all then. But for now, thank you all very much for your time.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you.
Thanks, AOP.
Thank you very much. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone, bye-bye.